Okay, so welcome back. This is part 4 in our series, in our playlist, where we show you the amazing world of 3D computer graphics. And we're going to use this wonderful piece of free software, professional grade software called Blender. And we showed you in the previous videos how to download this software, how to set it up, and how to use some of the modeling tools that we're going to start using in this video. And the goal of this video is to start building this very simple object. And it's a flashlight object that I have. You can see up here I've got a photograph of the flashlight. And down here is the kind of final version of the flashlight that I developed from scratch using Blender. And I modeled it, and I put textures, materials on it, and I put a light inside of it. So in this series, we're going to show you how to get to this point. And more importantly, what we're going to do is, unlike a lot of videos you might see, instead of just focusing on the software, which I think a lot of newbies do, and they think if I understand the software, then I can be an expert in whatever field. And that's just not true. The software is a tool, and I encourage you to not just focus on the tool. In this case, don't just focus on Blender. Focus on what you're trying to do. And in the 3D world, generally you're trying to replicate stuff in the real world, either objects or materials or animations. You're trying to replicate what you see in the real world, and there's a reason for that, because people who watch what you produce generally understand the real world, either consciously or subconsciously. They know what looks real, and they know what impacts them, and that's based on the real world. So it's really, really, really important that you focus on the real world, on the objects and their characteristics and animation characteristics, and how things work and how things animate in the real world, and then just focus on Blender as just one of the many tools you can use to get there. So, like I say, we're going to start out trying to build this object. And what we're going to do is we're going to come to this point where we have modeled the object. And then in future videos, we're going to show how to take that model and add materials and textures and lights and develop a scene that will make it look a lot like this real life flashlight. So now, one of the important things that I mentioned in previous videos is that we need to, first of all, to the extent possible, get a photograph of what we're trying to duplicate. In this case, I've got a photograph I took from my smartphone. You know, everybody's got a smartphone. It takes you 10 seconds to take a photograph. And we showed you how to bring that photograph into Blender and use that as a reference for whatever you're trying to build. It is really, really, really important, because then you can actually see what's there and not what you think is there, because generally, your beliefs about what things look like are not accurate. So, for example, let's take a look at a very simplified model of a flashlight that you might do off the top of your head. And here is, you basically take a cylinder and you shape it into a what kind of looks like a flashlight. But really, when you compare it to the actual flashlight, your brain's going to say, no, wait a minute, that's not a flashlight. That's a poor imitation. If you look down here at what we came up with, it's far closer. And the reason is because of the details. Details are extremely important, and they're the things that you tend to forget. And that's why it's so important to have an actual photograph. And as I mentioned before, it's even better if you can hold the object in your hand to see what comprises the object. So now let's focus on, as I mentioned before, by far the most important part of this whole process is the reference image. We're going to need this to figure out how we're going to build this, how we're going to put textures and surfaces on it. So it's really, really important that you go through this step. I showed you in the previous video how to bring a reference image into Blender. We're in orthogonal mode. Let's take a look at this image and figure out how we're going to design it. Again, like in software development or engineering, design is the most important part. So what we see here is a metal object, and it's shaped kind of like a cylinder. And you can notice that it's got multiple parts. You've got a part back here that you unscrew where you put the batteries in. You got the main handle, you got the front, And in here, presumably, you've got a light and a reflector. So there's multiple pieces to this, but they're all kind of cylindrical. Now, if you take it apart, you will see something like this. Here's that back piece that you removed to put in the battery. It's got a little spring thingy. Here's the handle. Here's the front piece, and inside of that, there's this reflector. And also in this front piece, there's a little LED light. And then you've got this piece that screws onto the front, and it holds the glass for the front of the flashlight. So you've got multiple pieces, and what we're going to do is we are going to build this flashlight in multiple pieces. And there's a reason for that. You don't always need to do that, but there are some benefits. So let's now start from the back and look at the different objects and how we can approach modeling them. Now, one of the important things with modeling is keeping attention to detail. And if we look at the details on this, most of this is just a smooth metal surface, but you can see here we've got a grip that allows you to take this, to unscrew this and put the batteries in. And there's also a grip up here that allows you to focus the light coming out of the reflector. We've got this big grip here to keep it from sliding around. So one of the important things we're going to have to figure out is how we're going to model this. This grip here, and this grip here. And the reason we want to think about this is because if you want it to look realistic, you need to somehow match what you see in the real world. That's because as you rotate this in real life, you're going to see different reflections, and the human eye is going to look at that and say, hey, I rotate that, I should see these reflections. So for example, with the model we developed, you can see as I rotate the view, you can see that the light changes. You know, there's different reflections as you change the object, as you change the view. So it's really important, if you want this to look like the real world, that you understand how the different surfaces affect the light and the reflections. So the important details we're going to have to consider here is these grips. The grip here, the grip on the handle, and the grip in the front. Now, there's different choices you can take to model these details. The first thing is you can actually make geometry. You can set up this piece of metal so that it actually mimics the real world. And you can imagine here, to make this grip, they had this circular piece of metal, and they had this big, heavy machinery that actually pressed these square indentations into the metal. And because of that, you can see there's different reflecting properties of the light. That actual real world stuff, we're going to actually model that in this piece. Now, are we going to do the same for this? Well, you could, but there are other alternatives where you can use a image, or what's called a texture, which is basically just an image that you map onto this to give it a fake geometry. And we'll talk about that in a future series. But what we're going to do here is we're just going to model a simple cylinder and use kind of a fake method of applying an image that kind of looks like this to make it look like it's got a real rough surface. Now we're going to, in the front, we're going to use the same technique of actually modeling these impressions on the grip when we build our model. So that's the way we're going to approach it. We're going to build 5 different objects. In these 2, we're going to actually model what's called the geometry. And here we're just going to use a simple cylinder and wrap an image on it that kind of looks sort of like this. Okay, so if you want to follow along with this and you want to use this image, just pause the video, take a screenshot, and we showed you in previous videos how to load this as a reference image. We're looking along the x-axis in orthogonal view, and let's start with this end cap. So we said before, most of this is like a cylinder. So this end cap, we're going to model each of these faces, these indentations, and we're going to start with presumably a cylinder. So let's go to, as we showed before, add mesh cylinder, and you can see it adds the cylinder to the middle of our scene, and we can rotate it and zoom out with our middle mouse, and move this over, and we're getting kind of close, right? We've got our cylinder, and there is one keyboard shortcut you're going to need to use. I hate using keyboard shortcuts, but one that you really are going to need, and that is the S or scale key. So you hit S and you will scale the object along all axes. So I'll hit S and scale it up to make it a little bit closer to the dimensions of this cap. So let's take a look. We'll zoom in here, and you can see somehow we're going to model this flat face and then an indentation and a flat face, an indentation, a flat face, and so on all the way around. But if you look at our cylinder, you see we've got one face, this one polygon. Somehow we're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 polygons inside here, and we're going to extrude every other one. So it turns out we made a big mistake by just adding the cylinder the way it is. We're going to have a cylinder that's got a lot more faces along here so that we can, for every other one, we can extrude it inwards to make this grip. So let's click on this, hit delete, and go back and try again. So we're going to add mesh cylinder, and it's extremely, extremely important that you look down here before you touch anything. See this little drop down that says add cylinder, and you click on the arrow, and it allows you to modify what your cylinder is going to look like. And you can see the cylinder it gave us has 32 vertices, which means 32 faces around the cylinder. The radius is 12 inches, which means there's 24 inches diameter of this cylinder. And the depth, or this Z dimension, is 24 inches. It's really important that you get the real world dimensions for these things so that the viewer it makes sense to the viewer. So we got some things we need to change. 32 vertices, we said, well, actually each face, we need like 6 times as many faces. So 6 times 32 is over 180 faces. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in 200, and that will give us a lot more faces that we can work with. The radius, I measured with a ruler the diameter of this grip on the flashlight, and it's a little over 1 inch. So the radius is going to be half that. So I'm going to say 0.5 inches. So this is more accurate to what the actual dimensions are. The depth, we're going to call it 1 inch. It's actually less than that, but something you can start out with. So here's the actual dimensions of our cylinder. Now the problem is we have this reference image, and it is much, much too big. We're going to select that. It's the empty here. We're going to hit the S key again, and we're going to move it so that it scales that image down to the actual dimension. And then we said you can zoom in by view, frame selected, and there's a keyboard shortcut, but we're going to try and avoid those. So now we're really close to the actual dimensions. Now, we said before, it's extremely important. We have scaled this down a lot. So what we need to do is in object mode, select the object, and object, apply, rotation, and scale. All right, get in the habit of doing that. The next thing we want to do is rotate it 90 degrees. Unfortunately, there's one more keyboard shortcut you're going to need to make it exactly 90 very easily. So I'm going to click on this ring and start to move it. And then I'm going to hit the control key and hold down control. And you can see in the upper left corner, it says rotation 90.00 global. And that tells you you have hit 90 degrees and you can release the mouse button. So now we've got our accurate reference image, and we've got our accurate end cap. Now you can see as we measure it relative to the end cap, it needs to be scaled a little bit more. So we'll hit the S key and move our mouse, and you can see now it's pretty much matching. All right, so we can also use these scaling gizmos, and I can move it like this to scale this down. And if I move it next to the reference image and then shift middle mouse button, I can pan over, and I can see that we're pretty close to where we need to be. So now what do we need to do? Well, you can see this is going to be very smooth. And we talked before about How do you smooth edges? Well, you're going to use the bevel. So we're going to be doing some beveling here. But the difficult thing is going to be making these indentations using the Extrude tool. The problem is, well, there's a couple problems. The first problem is we don't want to extrude every face. We want to do every other face. And also we want to separate our cap so that only a portion gets extruded and the rest remains smooth. So you can see over here on the left side, there's an area that's smooth. Then it starts the indentations, and then the rest is smooth. So how are we going to do that? Well, one of the 4 tools you're going to use all the time is called the loop tool. So we're going to select our cap, go into edit mode, and down here we've got our loop cut. So click on that, and as we hover over this, it gives us a loop cut all the way around the cylinder. So we can move this, click and drag our mouse, and we can leave a cut right there and go back to the select box, and you can see we have made a cut all the way around the cylinder. Now we're going to need another one to represent this other part of the extrusions. So we go back to the loop select, get another one, and we're going to put it down somewhere around here. And then hit the select button and go back to edit mode, or go back to object mode, and we can move this and we can see, yeah, we're pretty close to what we need. So now we've got all of these faces and we can somehow extrude every other one, and then all of this we're going to have to bevel. So how are we going to extrude every other face? Well, selecting is a really, really important aspect of modeling. You have to be proficient in the different tools there are to select different faces, edges, and vertices. And here's a really good example. So what we're going to do is we are going to select the object, go to edit mode, and there's a very important, up here there's some very important tools where you can define how you see your object. Right now we are in solid mode where everything is, all of the faces are colored kind of a gray, but we can go into wireframe mode and we can see through the object. We can see to the other side. And when you click on that, it automatically selects X-ray mode, which means you can also access the faces on the far side of the object. So these faces over here you can access. So very, very important. So now what we want to do, we're in edit mode, we want to go into face select, and we want to select all of the faces that are part of this indentation area. So how do you do that? Another very important tool, we can go to select, there is box select, okay? And you don't really need to select this menu item. All you need to do is left click somewhere in your scene and drag it, and it will box select these faces. Now notice that every face in face select mode has a dot in the middle, which means I can select the face only by selecting the dot associated with that face. So to select all these faces, all I got to do is left click, drag, and cover all of those dots, and I have selected all of the faces in that region. Pretty cool. Now, the challenge, how do I unselect or only select those every other face that I want to indent? There is a really nice option, again, going up to select, checker deselect, okay? So we hit that, and again, we get this menu item down here, this drop down, which allows you to define which you want to deselect. By default, it deselects every other one, and you can see what it's done is I've selected this one and deselected this and selected this and so on. Now we can adjust that. We can change this, say every 7th face is going to be deselected, and I can move that and I can do whatever I want. But the default is fine for us. It deselects every other face. So now what we can do, that we've got the every other face selected, we can apply our extrude tool and we can extrude them inwards. So I'm going to go to the extrude and make sure we're selecting extrude along normals. We explained in the other video that normals is basically, it tells you which direction each polygon is facing. So these down here are facing down, these are facing that way. So it's going to extrude along those directions. So now I'm ready to extrude, and I can drag this, and you can see, we'll go in closer, you can see that we are now extruding those areas. So I'm done extruding. I'll go back up to the select, and I want to get out of wireframe so I can see the results, and click in solid mode, and there you go. We have successfully made these indentations. So we're all done, right? Well, no, we got some more to do. We said in the previous videos where these are perfect edges, and nothing on the planet Earth is perfect. As you can see here, this is not real smooth and clean. So the minimum we want to do is we want to smooth out these edges. So we talked before about one of the 4 major tools, and that is the Bevel tool. So what I can do is I can go back, make sure I am in edit mode, and I can go back to the mode where we are in wireframe and X-ray. And what I can do is I can select all of the edges, and what I can do is I can box select this area of the extrusions, but make sure that I don't select anything outside of that. So I stay away from those dots for the other faces. So now I've selected all of those extrusions, and what I can do is I can now say, okay, I want to bevel those. So let's zoom in and apply a bevel to this. So we go down here to one of our very important tools, and that's bevel. Click on that and drag out the bevel, and you can see that it is making rounded edges. And I keep the left mouse button down and scroll my mouse wheel forward a couple times, and it adds more surfaces to that. I have successfully beveled my all of my edges. So that should be a little bit closer to what we got. Now, if I zoom in by scrolling my mouse wheel, you can see that it cuts off the view, and that's a setting in the camera that you need to be aware of. So I'm going to click on the camera and go up here to the view settings, and you can see clip start, and that is the point that the camera stops looking at stuff. Anything closer than 0.394 inches, it's not going to see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on that, scroll it to the left to the minimum 0.0394, and that allows me to zoom in more so I can get in closer. And you can see we've got these nice curved surfaces for all of our extrusions. Okay, so now we're pretty good. We've got our extrusions, and that's pretty close to the cap, and all we need to do is bevel. Now at this point, we need to keep in mind, we need to think ahead. So I'm going to go out of edit mode, I'm going to go to object mode and select this, and we said that we're going to reproduce this grip on this part. So what I can do is I can save myself some time, and I can duplicate this object and use it as a starting point for this front cone-shaped object. So I'm going to click on this, and if I right-click and go to Duplicate Objects and left-click on that, and I move my mouse, I'm not holding down any buttons, I move my mouse. If I right-click, it puts that new object, you can see it's cylinder 0.001, in the exact same place as the other one. And I can just move it out, and now I've got the starting point for this front cone-shaped object, all right? So it's always good to think ahead as to what else you need to do, and don't duplicate effort. Now what we can do is we can go back to this guy, zoom in, and what I need to do is I need to select these edges and bevel them. So how do I do that? Well, select the object, as we said before, go into edit mode. We want to be in edge select mode, and then we want to select all of these edges. Now, one extremely important selection method, and unfortunately, again, you're going to need a keyboard shortcut, and that is to loop select. So if I want to loop select all these edges, I hit the Alt key, keep that down, and click on an edge, and you can see it has now selected all of these edges, and I can now bevel them. So I've got the Bevel tool selected, and I can pull out, and you can see it is beveling this edge. Now what I can do is I can forward mouse, roll my mouse, and you can see I am getting rounder shapes. So I go back to the select mode, and you can see it's done a really nice job of rounding this object. I'll go back to object mode and move it out, and you can see, yeah, it's going to orthogonal. You can see, yeah, that's pretty close. You can spend more time and go get more accurate, but you can see it's really pretty good. So basically with the 4 simple tools, or even 3 simple tools, we can do a lot of stuff. Now, another habit you need to get into is naming your object, because guaranteed you're going to get modeling something and you get confused about which object is which. And I know people don't like doing this, but it takes 2 seconds to do it. So for example, we're going to rename this end cap. So it's called cylinder. I'm going to double click on it and type in rear. So now we know it's the rear object. We're going to click on this, and we're going to double click on this, call it cone. And now what we're going to do is we're going to add this grip cylinder, all right? So make sure you're in object mode, add mesh cylinder, and you can see it's going to give us the same vertex count as we had before. We don't want that because we don't need all the geometry here, because it's going to have a nice smooth cylinder with an image applied to it. So we go down here. Always remember to check this when you add an object. So vertices, we're going to go back to 32 vertices, and we're going to leave the dimensions about the same. So get rid of that, and now what we can do is we can start rotating, Control, and up on the top left corner you'll see 90 global, and that puts us with a 90-degree rotation. And what we can do is we can move this and center it, and then we'll take this little gizmo and we can scale it out to however long we want. So now we've got it about the same scale. You can see it's not quite matching the other one, so we can hit the S key and bring it out to however big we want. Now you notice when we did the S key, it does it on all axes. It does X, Y, and Z. But what we can do is Control Z and undo that. What we wanted to do is just scale it on the X and Z axes, which is the red axis and the blue axis. We didn't want to make it longer along this Y axis. So there is another unfortunate keyboard shortcut that you're probably going to want to know, and that is to scale it. You do an S like we did before, but you can constrain it to only the X and Z. And to do that, S, hit Shift and hold down Shift and click Y, and that will only scale it in the X and Z. So you're saying scale it in everything but Y. S, Shift, Y means scale it in every direction but Y. In object mode, we're going to name this handle, so we know which one it is. And let's take a look at what we're going to do with this. Now, we're going to leave this as a smooth cylinder. However, we're going to want to define the faces where we're going to apply this image. We're going to have an image that's going to look like a grip, and we're not going to actually model it. So we're going to have to call on our friend, the loop cut, to define these polygons, these faces, so that later we can specify only those faces are going to get the image. So we're in object mode. We want to go to edit mode. We want to go down to loop cut and hover, and it gives us a loop cut right there. We can move that over here. Hover again, it gives us that. Move it over here, and now we have defined our loop cut faces. Go back to select on the top, and now we're pretty much done with this handle. Go into orthogonal mode and get out of edit, go back into object mode, and we can move this guy back to where he is. So now we're doing good. We've got the end cap, we've got the handle, we've got the cone, and all we need to do is adjust this and modify it so that we can make it more of a cone shape. So let's move this guy out of here and start working on this. Well, we said that we can do an S key to scale it. So let's S and scale it. And right here, we're about matching the cone. Now, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to make the rest of it curve along this path. So we're going to use two tools at the same time. And you can imagine we're going to use the extrude tool to extrude out, but we also need to scale it to make it conform to this curve. So I've got my object selected in object mode. I want to go to edit mode. And what we're going to do is we're going to use the loop selection. We're going to go into this edge select mode and do our Alt and click on an edge, and we can extrude that using the extrude tool. We want to extrude region. We don't want it to go along normals. We want to extrude region. We get this plus sign that allows us to extrude out. And then use an S key to scale it. S, and I'm moving the mouse to the left. I'm not holding down any keys. I'm just moving the mouse to the left. And then I click, and that puts the face in the new position. I can do that again. I can extrude, scale, move it down, make sure I'm in orthogonal mode, extrude, S to scale, move it down, then extrude one more time, scale, and we've got it. So now we're pretty close to having our cone. So now if we look at our flashlight, what we've got so far in solid view, we can see, yeah, we're getting there. We got only a couple more things to do. We've got to do this end cap, which has the glass lens on it. And we also can't forget that there is a reflector object inside of this cone that we're going to have to model. But we're almost there. So what we're going to do is we are going to add another cylinder for this front object. We're going to add mesh cylinder, and you can see we get the same cylinder, and we're going to start rotating, control to shift 90, and here is our front cylinder. We're going to scale this down a bit, and of course we're going to have to do some beveling. What we're going to do is going to do S shift Y, and that will just increase it on the y-axis so it matches. The front of this, we're going to have to do a little bit of work to make it curved like the actual front object. You can see it's very curved here. We're going to select this, go into edit mode, and we're going to go into face select mode, and I'm going to click on this to select this front face, and we're going to use our friend, the Inset Faces. And click on that, and it gives you this little circle, and click on the circle and drag inwards, and it will give us a new face. And then what we can do is use our extrude to bring it in. So we extrude it in, and now we basically have our front object. All we have to do is bevel it. Now the other thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to delete this face, since the real one doesn't have a face there. It's got some glass, but we're not going to model that at this point. So I click on that, hit delete faces, and it has deleted the front face. I'm going to click on the rear face of this object, hit delete faces, and now we've got the front object. Now we also want to get out of edit mode, go into object mode for this cone object, and we're going to want to do the same thing, get rid of this face that doesn't exist, because we've got the reflector in here and this is open. So I'm going to go into edit mode, face select mode, click on this, delete faces. And now you can see we're open on both objects, and we can add our reflector in here. So back into orthogonal view, go into object mode, select this, and move it back. And now we've got that. So all we got to do is we have to add another cylinder and make a cone out of it. So one way we can make the reflector is just use this handle and scale it. So I can go into object mode, click on this, and if I right click, I can see duplicate objects. And I left click on that, and you can see it's given me a handle 001 up in the list of objects. And if I right click, it puts it back at the same location. But here I've got my object. What I can do is I can scale it down, and I can modify this to be more like a cone shape. So I can go into edit mode, and you can see I've got a little bit of geometry here, and I can go into face mode, select this, and I can scale this down, and it will go more of a cone shape. Now there is another nice tool that you can use to affect other, in this case, other faces when I do, for example, a scale. And up here, you can see this thing called proportional editing. And I can click on that, and you can select how you want it to act. But basically what it does, I've got this face selected, and if I hit scale, it's affecting the entire object. But if I move my mouse wheel forward, you can see it's affecting more parts of the object. I can have it affect more or less parts of the object. And I can scale it down, and you can see right there I can get these new shapes. And so that proportional editing is really very helpful feature. Make sure though, after you've done it, you deselect it, because probably you're not going to want to use it again in the next thing you do. We're going to rename it, very important. We call it reflector. So now we've got the reflector, and we can add that inside our object and use that as the reflector. Now, of course, you're going to probably want to scale it. So we can remove our empty, and you can see that it's not filling up the entire thing. So we can do the S, hold down Shift, click Y, and it will expand it to better fit inside our flashlight. Now again, we're going to have to get rid of this face here. So we're going to go to Object Mode, Edit Mode, Face, click on this, hit Delete key, Faces, and now you have deleted the front face. So now we're pretty much done. We've got our object modeled. We got all 5 pieces modeled. One thing we can do, make sure you're back in object mode. These objects aren't really smooth, and there's a thing you can do to make it look a little bit smoother. So for example, for this handle, click on it in object mode, right click, and go to Shade Smooth. And you can see it smooths it out. Now you're also going to want to do something that's very unfortunate, but you have to go through that and you have to get it in your mind. To do this, whenever you do a shade smooth, go down here to this little triangle thing, and it allows you to set normals, which we discussed before, on your object, and go to normals, hit the drop down, and hit auto smooth. Get into the habit of always doing that whenever you do a shade smooth. So we're going to do the same for this object. Right click, shade smooth, go to normals, auto smooth. Click on this, right click, shade smooth, auto smooth. Click on this, right click, shade smooth, and auto smooth, all right? So just one of those annoying things you have to get in the habit of doing. One thing I forgot, we're going to have to, with this front object, we're going to have to bevel these edges. So we're going to edit mode, and again, we're going to go into edge select. We're going to do Alt, ring select, and to select this other one at the same time, this other ring, we do Shift, Alt, and you've selected both rings so you can bevel them simultaneously. So we're going to go into bevel mode, pull that out, and you can see we have smoothed the edges. And if I scroll my mouse wheel forward, I get more faces. And now we go back into select mode, you can see we have beveled that successfully. We've got our object, we can check it versus our reference image, and you can see we're pretty close. So in the next videos, we're going to be looking at other aspects of this 3D computer graphics. We're going to be looking at lights and materials and surfaces, images, compositing, all aspects of this to help you to better understand how it all works. Now, if you like any of these videos, I encourage you to hit the like button, subscribe, hit the bell notifications, and most of all, let others know that we're here so we get some more views. Really appreciate it. Otherwise, take care. Have a really good day. Thanks.